Okay, hello everyone, and happy Digital Wellness Day. That's the first time I got to say that. Nina and Chris, I know you've said that a few times today, especially Chris, because it's late there. So we'll get to that next. But first of all, just wanted to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us, and especially those who are able to join us live. It's so nice to be able to have an actual conversation and interact with each other, especially on a topic like this where there's a lot of variation about how people feel about their relationships with technology. There's actually even a lot of debate in the research about what's helpful and what's harmful, and I find that really fascinating too. So I thought it would be a perfect time to bring together a couple of my new dear friends. I'm so grateful that I have had the opportunity this year to become part of the teaching team for the Digital Wellness Institute. And Nina Hersher, who's here with us, is one of the co-founders, along with another good friend of mine, Amy Blankson. And I went through actually as a participant. Really, my whole intention was to be a participant because I knew I needed to learn how to improve my relationship with technology. I last year had just decided I was going to give up and break up with technology. But it turns out that was not going to be sustainable, especially for someone who is teaching and speaking and doing things that require, especially during COVID-19, really require the use of technology. So we're going to be sharing some ideas and some basic concepts related to digital wellness. But as I always say, I really want to hear from you and make sure we're speaking to your questions. So to get us started here, just a quick reminder that if you are on LinkedIn or Facebook Live, first of all, you can share the broadcast if you think this could be helpful for someone else. We would love that. And we would love to hear where you are streaming in from so that we can say hello. And it's fun to get to know so many of you in doing the Stress Mastery Show over the last year. I see some familiar faces already starting to pop in. So I will say hello to Cheryl, who I believe is not too far down the road in San Diego. Cheryl says aloha, although maybe you're in Hawaii, which would be cool. Did my beach brain walk this morning, which was a good way to kick off the day. And in fact, I had a debate with myself of which was more important, going for a beach walk or doing my hair, and the beach walk won, if you couldn't tell. But I think it was a good investment. Also, John Jacopi, awesome to see you from Rhode Island. It's been a minute, my friend. Awesome to see you and fun to see your family there in that picture as well. Thanks for hanging out with us. And please continue to say hello as we get started. I know more people will be joining us. So I want to kick off actually with Nina. So Chris, I'm going to say bye to you for a moment. We'll bring you back in a little bit. Nina, I would love to have you share with our group here a little bit about this whole idea of digital wellness and where it came from and why it was so important to you to get this kicked off.
Thank you, Heidi, and happy Global Digital Wellness Day. We're having such a wonderful day, and I'm excited to talk about this together. So for a little bit of context, when we're talking about digital wellness, we're referring to what is the optimum state of well-being that each individual using technology is capable of achieving. And so very simply put, you can think of this as wellness in this increasingly digital era of ours. And at the Digital Wellness Institute and with our Digital Wellness Day global community, we have this kind of new term that we're using called digital flourishing. And this is really a healthy tech versus anti-tech approach to how we can engage with our devices. And so what that really means is how can we engage with them in a mindful capacity where we can enjoy all of the beautiful things that technology affords us, like connecting right now, while avoiding some of those associated harms like tech neck and fear of missing out and some of those other things that aren't quite as pleasurable.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember that was kind of a game changer mindset for me was, can we actually flourish? Can we actually use technology to make us better? I feel like I was in kind of an abusive relationship where and it's probably a little bit still, any ding, ping, distraction, I just get so frustrated because I have a hard time staying focused. And yet there's a lot of technology that can actually help us to stay focused if we know how to use it. I know I'm going to actually talk to Chris a little bit more about some of those practical things. So in the digital flourishing model, I believe that was kind of built upon some of the concepts that Marty Seligman had in positive psychology. How did you all work together to come up with those different components of digital flourishing?
Great question. So we have a spectacular research director, Dr. Sophie Bowles, over at Chapman. And so we came up with this framework, and we've been doing research on it together, actually, to create the first ever tool that looks at thriving online in different areas with an actionable score per category. And so the digital flourishing approach is definitely a positive media psychology approach, which is kind of a subcategory of positive psychology overall that looks at how we can thrive in these different areas with tech.
That's awesome. And so with the Institute, before we start talking about some of the practical solutions, what has been your vision for that, and how has it been going? I know I've participated a little bit last year and then got more involved this year, and just continuing to be super excited about what you all are doing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that entails?
Absolutely, Heidi. So we've been working on the curriculum for the Institute for about 3 years. And about a year and a half ago, when COVID was just starting to ramp up, we realized that we needed to accelerate its launch. And so we came together with now a group of 32 amazing teachers, including Heidi and Chris, who are on this call today, to really, I think, curate and distill all of the expertise in one place. And so we have this digital flourishing wheel, and just a few of the categories are things like productivity, mental health, physical health, communication, quantified self, which is really tech-enabled health. And we have teachers who kind of focus on these different areas and speak to their expertise with these actionable tips. And so the Digital Wellness Institute was really created to equip different educators, health promotion practitioners, organizational leaders with tools for their teams to empower people to have a healthier relationship with technology. And so currently, out of the Digital Wellness Institute, we have a 10-week certificate program. Our next cohort starts on May 14th, And we also partnered with Athabasca University, which is the top online learning university in Canada, to create a series of on-demand courses. And so if you're maybe not ready to commit to 10 weeks, but you want to get your feet wet, our first course with them actually launched today on Global Digital Wellness Day. And it's called Digital Wellness Optimizing Your Time and Energy. And it's just an hour and a half. So it's very approachable for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more.
Oh, I love that. I didn't realize it was a Canadian learning company, which is interesting. I'm super into Canadian things at the moment. So just a fun little side note. So that's awesome. Let me see. So with the certificate, and just to mention, there is a certificate that goes with the training, with the 10-week training. And I just want to let everybody know, I have been involved in so many certificate programs. I've created my own. I'm taking classes, I'm teaching classes, and I was just blown away at the quality of the faculty, but also the resources, the references, all of the information. In fact, it's something I have to keep going back to just to make sure that I can actually incorporate all of it. So Nina, I'm going to bring Chris on for a moment. I'm going to pop you off, but you'll be back here in just a moment so we can do a discussion. And Chris, I'm hoping that you would share a little bit about your background. And you and I are just still getting to know each other, but I really wanted to have you on because in the modules that you taught, they were so packed with really practical information. And there seemed to be a whole language that you had around this topic that was kind of new to me. So what brought you into this space? What's your background?
Great. Well, first of all, Heidi, thanks for having me here. I chose to have a hair day today. I didn't have a beach to go for a walk on, so made a real effort. So my story is, my background is in technology. I worked for 15 years in big tech consulting firms. And during that time, I was a big fan of technology. I still am. But because of that, I was a very early adopter. So I was the first one in my office to have an iPhone, the first one to have an iPad, and also then the first one to be online 24/7. And during that time, that was about 20 years ago, I thought that was a really, really good use of my time. But then over time, 10 years ago, it started to have a bit of a negative impact. I actually changed sector around 10 years ago. I moved over to the not-for-profit sector. And one of the projects I worked on involved me moving over to India. And a lot of my time was working on rural projects where I was off the grid. So it was almost as if I had this social experiment of being completely connected. And then all of a sudden, totally unconnected. And when I returned to Ireland, I just got really curious as to the science around this. So I started to work with a team of psychologists and neuroscientists and really just dig into the seeds of science around the research that shows us if we make some small changes in how we use technology, we can have some really positive impacts on our productivity and our well-being. So it's interesting that you mentioned the language, because when I was first involved in this, so back in kind of the tail end of 2014, the language was very different, right? There was things like digital detox and tech life balance. The likes of the Digital Wellness Collective and the Digital Wellness Institute coming together actually formulated a more standardized lexicon, and we've now got the phrases like digital well-being and digital wellness is so much more mainstream, and we get what they mean. But that's taken quite a while. I think another thing that made a big change was back at the end of 2017, we had a lot of the big tech companies that influence our behavior, so the likes of Alphabet, so Google, Apple, and Facebook, they introduced digital wellbeing strategies. So all of a sudden they were giving us the tools to help us actually use technology. But I guess what we really need help with was how we use those tools, but also why we need to use those tools. Because I think one thing that's really important from a behavior change point of view is quite often we think it's great, we need to change. But if we think of the example of food, we've had nutritional labels on food for the last couple of decades, and we're still faced with an obesity crisis. So it's one thing having the tools, but we really need to understand why we need to use them, and then how we use them. And that's why institutions such as the Digital Wellness Institute really make that a lot easier. The language is there. They've created a really simple system for us to use. So that's made life a lot easier for us from an awareness point of view.
Yeah, I find that really interesting how there's all of these technology platforms and programs and apps and everything that I know for me it feels really overwhelming. So I know that there's things that could help me, but it feels like every day there's a new thing and a new thing that I'm trying to learn. So if you were talking to somebody kind of just from the very beginning and trying to encourage them to get clear on the how or the why, or kind of what you're talking about, how would you start that conversation?
Yeah, so I'm still a huge fan of new technology and very much an early adopter. We can never keep up with this, right? Yeah. So it's really about kind of stepping back and as we do with all behavior change, actually having a look at our current situation, so having that sense of awareness. And the easiest way to do that is we have the tools built into our systems. We have on Apple, we have screen time, on Google, we have digital wellbeing. And on our office tools on Microsoft, we have My Analytics. So behind the scenes, this is always just seeing what we're using, and then we're able to get a report whenever and just see, okay, well, look, I'm using all these different technologies. And at that point, then start to actually categorize them. Some of these are really good. Like we know at the moment, this idea of having connectivity into people that we might not be able to see. We still have a loose lockdown here in Ireland. And for me, I haven't seen my family since last year, and this is the only way I can reach them. So that's a good use of technology. Maybe watching too much entertainment or social media, not so good use of technology. So it's about, first of all, identifying what those different types are, and then just seeing, how much am I using them, what different times of day, patterns around that. And a really good example of a study that can help us with this is called the iPhone effect. It was originally out of Virginia Tech. It's been replicated lots of times, but it's one of my favorites. Although it's called the iPhone effect, it's about any digital device. And quite simply what it shows us is, with our behavior with technology, if we have a digital device in our line of sight, even if it's turned over and switched off, it will still influence our behavior. So even if we think we're not necessarily checking our Facebook or checking our TikTok or doing whatever, quite often if we have those devices in our line of sight, so say, for example, now I'm on a video call, if I have that next to me, I might be thinking my intention is here with Heidi, but at the same time, the temptation of TikTok or the temptation of email because I'm expecting an Amazon delivery. So it's a really good study just to identify that fact that we need to be aware of when we have other devices open. So that whole thing of looking at what we're using and then having an idea as to why we're using that. And the iPhone effect gives us a good analogy of why that impact is there.
That's awesome. I'm going to bring Nina back here and just kind of pose this to both of you, and also remind everyone, if you're here with us live, we really want to answer your questions or give you strategies or solutions to whatever it is that you are currently possibly struggling with, or maybe your kids are struggling with, or your workplace is having challenges. And if you don't ask questions, I have lots and lots. So I will take all of their time and attention. Don't worry about that. But my first question, and this comes up to me a lot, is how do you know what your relationship with technology is? Like, how do you know when maybe it's not healthy? What are the types of things that might show up for someone? And either of you can answer that.
I'll jump in on that one if that's okay. I think it's, it's like anything when it comes to the difference between almost like a compulsive relationship, which typically is a relatively healthy relationship, and then it verges on maybe going towards addiction, which is when it starts to have an impact on parts of your life, such as sleep, relationships, intimacy, focus. So for the majority of us at the moment, we're finding we're using technology a lot more because we're having to just to connect to friends and family in various lockdown situations. But when we're doing that, quite often we're creating habits like task switching and things like that. If we're constantly using different apps, quite often that can then lead to our body having an expectation of just habitual checking, and that can have an impact on our sleep. So it's things like that. When we start to see, okay, our sleep has been impacted, we're waking up in the middle of the night, we're feeling we need to check our phone, then we need to just, what is it that's actually driving that? Is there a specific app that we're used to using, or do we have that habit of checking throughout the day? Do we have the habit of multitasking, which is encouraging that even more? So yeah, it's finding that point in your life. So whether it's in the bedroom when you're sleeping, or whether it's when you're with friends and family, and all of a sudden, you haven't seen your friends for a long time, and yet you're checking your phone. So it's finding those points and then trying to pull back as to what is the trigger.
Yeah.
That's
Nina.
such wonderful advice, Chris. And I guess I'll add that for me, with a lot of my clients, it comes back to how can we kind of bring our attention back to our physical plane, because with computers and with having spent so much time online, we're in a very kind of cerebral place, and so oftentimes, especially if we're not taking breaks, we're not even aware until the end of the day that perhaps our neck hurts, or perhaps we're hungry, which can then lead to other health issues. And so I would say that the warning signs or the cues for a lot of people have to do with really tuning in to what's happening in their physical bodies, and kind of bringing that intention to their attention back to their physical bodies. And so that might look like shifting your ergonomics slightly, or wearing blue light glasses, but that's a really wonderful and simple place to start.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I feel like I'm in this pattern right now of constantly feeling like I'm missing something. And it's not fear of missing out. It's not like I'm missing something that other people are doing. It's like I'm missing something I'm supposed to be doing. Like there's just so much being scheduled all the time. And I'm constantly checking, even just to check like my calendar and see what's going on. And I find that it's almost become like that's more the norm. Like, I feel like that even if I really don't have anything going on, and that to me starts to represent kind of an energetic shift of just having too much going on at one time. So I just want to share a couple of comments here that have come in. So Jess Paul says, slippery slope. Thanks, Chris. That's even more of a pitfall compared to other addictions. It's so 24/7 available. And not only that, but it's expected, right? So it's not like we can really completely turn it off. There's a lot of expectations from other people that we are available. And that makes me think of something that comes up a lot. Would love your guys' thoughts on this, is how do we actually figure out what kinds of boundaries we need to set and how we can actually set those. I know for me last year on my birthday, I actually asked my family for one thing, and that was, I just am going to be totally offline. I'm turning off all my technology. I know you want to wish me happy birthday, and I appreciate that. I'm going to thank you ahead of time, but I just don't want to be connected. And it was so cool, but I still felt like I kind of felt guilty for not responding to people who are wishing me happy birthday. It was so bizarre. So how do we know like what boundaries to set and how to actually hold firm to those boundaries with technology?
Yeah, so I'm happy to chime in on this. And the way that I teach this is really in the context of social ecology and culture change. And so examining people's relationship with their environment. And there are three main tiers here. And so we have our personal realm, which is your habits, our interpersonal realm, which is really relationships between people, and then that collective level, which is really a systems level. And so just 3 things that you can start doing today or this weekend is you can consider on that personal level with your habits, creating a 30-minute AM or PM unplugged routine. Mm-hmm. And this might sound scary, so maybe you want to start with 10 minutes, make it a little bit more approachable. But I find that even when I have to wake up earlier, having that unplugged time to sip my coffee or my tea to ground for the whole day makes me a lot calmer and more resilient for when I do open the inbox and that kind of flood comes at me. Because oftentimes when we're checking our email, first thing especially, we're actually going into this state of fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. And there's also research that shows sometimes when we check our email, we hold our breath. And so if you think about how often we do that throughout the whole day, it just gives you even more reason to create a morning routine and a grounding practice before you enter work. And then in the evening, of course, we want to create that routine so that we're not exposed to blue light, so we can fall asleep more easily, so we can reconnect with our partners, our children. And there's so much power in just making that small shift. Mm-hmm. So I guess the kind of next level there would be that interpersonal level. And this is where you can create a charging station in your home that actually doubles as an unplug box. And so just like we want to recharge our phones, we want to recharge ourselves. And if you have this box in a common area, such as the kitchen, it can help to kind of create this collective accountability in your home so that you're not the only one doing it. And that can be very, very powerful as well, and really speaks to how can we create a physical environment to support positive behavior change. Mm-hmm. And then that last kind of level, Heidi, is about that collective level, which is about creating a communication charter or a family charter, which I would actually love to have Chris speak to because that's one of his areas of expertise.
Yes, and I was going to ask him the same thing. That was one of my favorite things that came out of my training and something that I'm going to implement immediately with my teaching team at Harvard Extension. We just had a lot of communication gaps this semester, and it was like, okay, I'm going back to basics. I'm going to do the charter. Just one quick thing I want to say before we do that is you mentioned something that I remember kind of took my breath away when I first heard it, and that was tech apnea or email apnea, or this idea that when we're using technology, some people hold their breath. I totally do that. Even if I'm presenting, I take these really short, shallow breaths. And what I realized is if I'm on technology pretty much all day, my breathing patterns were horrible. So just that reminder, as much as we can, to actually be in the moment and breathe is an excellent practice. So Chris, yeah, I would love to hear more about this communication charter idea. I think it's really awesome.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to Nina's really there in relation to where we should be focusing to look at our boundaries. Because I think it kind of builds back on that previous question in relation to the awareness. It's where we can have the most impact. And I think the trend that I've seen is kind of the top question that comes up in our masterclasses. It always comes back to the bedroom and sleep and kind of creating those buffers, as Nina was saying, at the beginning and the end of the day. But one thing to note as far as switching tech off in the bedroom, especially now because we want to be more connected than ever, it's really hard, right? We all know that phones are amazing alarm clocks. You go to a departmental store, you go online to a retail store, put in alarm clock, and typically it's a docking station. So if we rip out the phone, then what are we going to replace it with? We potentially could replace it with a basic alarm clock, but then our mind's going to have a little bit of trouble because that's a little bit like punishment. So it means it's not going to fit. So ideally, if we're going to do that, we need to do it in small doses and swap it out with something really lovely. So find a lovely alarm clock, whether it's one of those ones that wakes you up with the sunlight, or something like Lofty, which is a wonderful screen-free device that has meditations and sound baths on, or even a voice assistant like Alexa without the screen. So yeah, that was just my add-in on that.
There's some good ones with aromatherapy too, I would add, because I know that can be really helpful for easing us into sleep. Yeah, just a very funny aside there. I actually got a Kickstarter project with an alarm clock a couple of years ago that woke you up with the smell of different things. And it was supposed to wake you up with the smell of croissants and the smell of coffee, the smell of toast. And these were all different capsules, and each capsule just smelled of burning plastic. So that was my bad experience of being an early adopter with technology with that.
Just to move on, something that you both talked about there, the team charter. So this is something we've been talking to companies about for a long time. It's almost that idea of, okay, so we work with individual digital habits, but then in order to have a framework to make them sustainable, we need to look at that from a collective point of view. So looking at digital culture, more related to the likes of organization psychology. And where that comes in today's world is all these wonderful initiatives around flexible working arrangements like Zoom Free Fridays, and certain other things that are giving us a breakaway. It's actually making sure that if we're going to do that, it's as opposed to just a tactical solution, it's strategic. So a really good example would be a team charter where within the team, there's actually an agreement as to what all the different platforms are used for. So, you know, we might be in a team where we think we know, Heidi really likes WhatsApp, Nina likes Slack, but we've never actually sat down and said, guys, which are our priority platforms? Which is the one platform that if there's a burning fire, I can get you on, as opposed to going on all of them, which creates a huge issue when it comes to psychological detachment and task switching and that habit, as you were saying, Heidi, that feeling of you needing to constantly check. If you can actually, you know, if you can sit with yourself in an evening and say, okay, I might get a ping this evening, but I know it's only going to be on one channel. That's not ideal, but it's a lot better than it being potentially on 6 channels. So that's an idea of a communications channel. You know, you can have the same thing with like a video call charter where you have things like, okay, let's think of the likes of Zoom fatigue. I know, Heidi, you shared the article in the, I think it's the Washington Post about Eric Wan saying that he, as the Zoom founder, has Zoom fatigue. If we think of some of the challenges with Zoom fatigue, the likes of the fact that we're staring into the screen. So how could we create a charter around that? We could say, well, potentially we can have camera off for some calls. We can have self-view off for some calls. And then if we think of the likes of other areas of Zoom fatigue, like cognitive overload, that idea of the iPhone effect. So for some Zoom calls or some video calls, we could have a one device policy. And this is something that a lot of companies have actually put in as an intervention. So here in Ireland, we have the European Head Office for Twitter, and Sinead McSweeney, who's the MD for Twitter and the head of policy for EMEA, she had a policy for no device policy for team meetings before lockdown. And now a lot of that's translated over to the likes of calls like this, where there's a one device policy. Again, it just comes back to that idea of, okay, so if we're all doing this, it works. If it's just one person, it doesn't work. And that's where we really need the team charter, so we can share norms and values. But it's really just the start of a conversation, because it's such a new era, right? This whole idea of blended, digital first, hybrid working, it's really exciting, but it's something that's totally new. You know, there's researchers like Nick Bloom at Stanford who's been looking at this for the last 10 years, but we've never looked at this in this changing environment with all these various other components of, you know, new awareness of variants that might put us back in lockdown. We hope not, but, you know, we never know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. So the whole idea of being fluid, but making sure you're actually having a conversation such as a team charter. And we're finding they're just incredible at the moment. It's such simple things, but it's really bringing people together and helping them improve their, not only their work processes, but their ability to switch off, which is huge at the moment.
I think that conversation is so critical too, because it just feels like everyone's feeling overwhelmed by having to try to figure out where to look. And same thing, I don't even know, because I don't have notifications on for most of my apps. So I'm trying to remember, now that I'm back in school, it's funny you mentioned that I like WhatsApp, because I don't. But like, that's what my classmates at school are using. But then my students in another program are using something else, and my work's using. So it's just that, like, I have to go look at it and remember to go look at it. And then what social media platforms do I care about? Do I care about any of them? I care about LinkedIn, of course, and Facebook. But yeah, just kind of like having a reality check with ourselves of like, why am I using this? Be more intentional. And then what's my preference? We may not all be able to use our preference, but at least we'll know why we're doing what we're doing. And I think as a team, that can be so impactful. I also wanted to bring up a comment Kevin made earlier. And Kevin has been a longtime fan of this show and my work. So Kevin, great to hear from you again. He just moved from Vancouver, Canada to Spain. I believe you moved, Kevin. So you're settling in. So it's interesting. He's talking about hearing parties in Spain, tapas, singing, dancing. You would think that there's no COVID. So he's wondering, what is the detriment of the social isolation caused by tech? And I think this goes back to a question I had posed to you guys before. When it comes to research, we can see a lot of things on kind of both sides of the spectrum. And I think that a lot of it depends on the person's well-being, mindset, genetics, life experience, a lot of the things we talk about with stress and stress sensitivity going into the situation. So it may not be the platform per se, but the person using the platform and how that's working or not working for them. So I know a lot of times technology is being blamed for disconnecting us, but yet it's really a tool to help us connect. So just curious your thoughts on those types of things.
Yes, and Heidi, I would love to kind of echo what you just said, because every person is going to have a different experience with social isolation during COVID, depending on where they're located, what laws are currently in effect. Are there other people in the household? Are there other kind of animals in the household, and all of these different aspects? We as humans aren't really supposed to get all of our needs met by one person. And so even for those people who have someone else in the household, it's very, very natural to crave other human interaction and socialization. And I'm sure that Chris has a lot to say about that also, because we've had very different kind of norms of connection in our different countries over this last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd echo that. I think, as you were saying, Heidi, just in relation to the different resources we have, if we're feeling quite low in our resources, so low emotional well-being, then typically the research has shown we're more vulnerable to potentially, spend more time and potentially go down that rabbit hole and end up in a bit more of a negative space. Whereas if we're in a good place and we use it in small amounts, it can have a really, really positive effect. So it does really, really depend on where we are. I think just in relation to, let's say, for example, how it's transitioning back into the real world. I had a funny experience last week. I had a conference call with a couple of people from one organization, and they had the same virtual background, and somehow the virtual background joined. And I can't believe how excited I got, but I thought they were in the same room. And just coming back to Nina's point, we are social animals. We're made to be in a tribe. So I think, we know the benefits of this, but I do feel that we will, as soon as we can, especially if you live in Spain and you have tapas singing, we'll revert back to that in real life. I always have to be careful when I say IRL, because it's also Ireland, which is all real life. So yeah, I think we'll revert back to that quite quickly. But we have, it's great. We're now able to take the best of technology. If we'd said to ourselves 18 months ago, we're going to be working from home, we probably wouldn't have, we might have been a bit skeptical of the power of IT, just thinking, can the whole world do this? And yet all those wonderful IT departments around the world have made it work. McKinsey called it the quickening. It was incredible. So we know there's those really good components, and we have this potential lovely flexibility, but we've still got a long way to go as far as getting these right shared values, norms, so that we can actually flourish in this world.
Wonderful. Well, I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Sean, who's here. Sean Waters is in South Africa and has written a book on Technostress. And this is kind of his area of expertise. I've had him on our Global Stress Summit before. So Sean, thanks for joining us. And he mentions that changing backgrounds helps to break the fatigue. I know that I've been doing that a little bit too. One of my favorite backgrounds I've been using is the Seinfeld set, which also just feels kind of fun and playful. This isn't it, by the way. This is just real. But sometimes I just like real, and sometimes I like just a white background, and sometimes I like the virtual, kind of depending on the energy I want to bring to whatever the experience might be. So I want to ask everyone who's watching, and then I want to ask you guys this as well, but what are your best practices? So Sean mentioned maybe changing backgrounds. What are the other types of things that you do to make sure that you're using technology to your benefit? And then we'll talk about some of those here as a group as well. Before we do that though, Chris, you mentioned working from home, and I feel like this is such a hot topic right now. It's something I'm asking a lot of my clients about, and it's really, there's quite a mix of people who want to continue to work from home, some that don't. It feels like a lot of that has to do with personal control and having a choice in the matter. But I'm just curious if there's anything that you've been kind of thinking or writing or speaking about with regards to this kind of work from home culture and where that might be going.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing that I'm really learning is this is going to be a very agile, iterative process as far as testing out what works and what doesn't. I think, before we had disparity in the office as far as we're all different as humans, but now that has widened even more because we have such different situations at home. So it is being very much aware that we all have different situations at home, and also that a lot of jobs just aren't really suitable in the long term to be at home, where there's a lot more synchronous work, so a lot more collaborative coming together, and specifically creative and innovative work. People like that really struggle. Both McKinsey and BCG have been very vocal about trying to get people back to the office because their creativity just isn't there. But for a lot of people, it's about finding that right balance, but it will take time. So I'm seeing a lot of organizations, as opposed to just create a strategy, just looking to create bite-sized projects. So whether it is just looking at team charters around certain things, trying to see what works, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel, because this is the biggest change we've gone through since the Industrial Revolution. It's massive, and we need to, not rush things and just go back into it softly.
Great. Nina, how about you? Any thoughts on this working from home situation, where we're headed?
I think we're seeing that the majority of companies are opting towards this idea of flex or hybrid work because they know that they can actually save a lot of costs by not having people in the office all the time. But a lot of people are enjoying working from home, yet craving that creativity that seems to only happen in the organic way that offices or human in-person connection provides. And so I think there are going to be even more conversations about this coming up. I also think we're going to see a very big rise in team retreats and what that looks like, because organizations may even opt to not have an office, but they might want to bring the employees together once a month or something like that. That's optional. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how different hotels and retreat centers create the space for those types of activities.
Yeah. What a great unexpected plug, by the way, because sometimes I'm doing so many things, I forget what I'm doing until it's like right in front of me. So I'm super excited because I'm going to do 2 brain recharge retreats at Canyon Ranch Woodside this year. So last year when COVID happened and the San Francisco ended up being a hotspot and shutting down, we were doing our first brain recharge retreat up there. So that was interesting to go through that experience. But we have one planned in October and another one in December. October is about creativity. So I'm going to have my one of my colleagues from Harvard Extension, Dr. Shelley Carson, who's an expert on creativity and teaches a creativity course at Harvard. She's going to be there with me. So a creativity retreat. And then on my birthday, actually, which will be cool, in December, I'm going to have my friend Yakov Smirnov with me, and we're going to do a humor recharge retreat. So quick little plugs for that. And I love doing team retreats. It's my favorite because there's only so much you can do in a meeting or a motivational talk or whatever. But when you can get people together in shared space and really experience some of the things we're talking about, I think it's incredibly powerful. So I'm looking forward to that. We've got a couple comments here. So I'm just going to share a few of these from our viewers first, and then we'll kind of go around and share some of our best practices. So I know Kevin talks about getting inspired by technology for motivation. I know he works out a lot, so he's always listening to podcasts and doing things like this while he's hiking or biking or doing other things. Ironically, this person, we cannot see your picture, which is hysterical because you say you have your LinkedIn photo on Zoom. So when you turn your camera off, they can see your face. But I did happen to look up your name on my phone and it looks like that's Catherine. So Catherine, thanks for sharing that. Let's see. Sean mentions working on the patio sometimes, which I think is super helpful. We also have someone mentioning that sometimes it depends on good internet connectivity, which isn't always the case. I certainly know people who've had challenges, and sometimes I've had challenges with that here, being close to the ocean. for whatever reason. Someone told me at one point they don't give us as much bandwidth because we're by the ocean. I don't know if that's true. So other than that, I'm trying to think. For me, best practices, I love putting my phone on airplane mode. I feel like there's something even just psychological about making the choice to be offline when I'm on the ground. So it's like I'm on airplane mode, nothing's coming in. I've chosen to not be available. That feels like just enough of a buffer for me sometimes to keep me from feeling super distracted. And I would say I do a pretty good job of turning it off in the evening. I do a really good job in the morning. So Nina, you mentioned like a 30-minute unplug in the morning. I call it my plug-in time because it's where I plug in kind of spiritually to how I want to show up during the day. And mine is almost 2 hours now. So I will get up super early just to have that time. It feels really important to me. So how about you guys? Nina, how about you? What are just some best practices that you use to help you?
Yeah, so on the tech for good side of things, I think I really frame it in terms of how can we use technology to fuel versus fatigue us. And so in that vein, breaks are going to look so different for different people. People recharge through diverse practices. And so there's a visualization I like to do, which is imagine you have an inner pilot light and you're taking a break. Is that activity helping that fire to grow, lighting that light even more, or is it blowing it out? And so for some people, if they do have a half an hour break, they'll end up scrolling Instagram the whole time. And for some people, that actually is recharging, but for other people, that's going to be extremely depleting.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to share real quick here. One of my dear friends, Andrea Canny, says that she takes dance breaks. She cranks Tom Jones and dances between Zooms, and I can see that now. So I have a visual, and that is lighting my inner pilot light. Thank you, Andrea. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, in between my dance breaks, I choose something very similar to you in relation to flight mode. One of my favorite apps. So like Nina says, I use Tech for Good. There's an app which is free both on the iPhone and on Android. And it's one of the top productivity apps in both. It's called Forest. And I love gamification. This is me. I love new technology and I love things that pull me in, but I love things that actually help me manage things better with that layer of gamification. So what Forest does is quite simply when you want to have a focused time period. So if I'm developing a new program or if I'm doing some deep research, I might still want to check my phone every once in a while, if there's something happening in the news, but this discourages me from doing that by planting a seed and growing a forest. So basically I'll say, okay, for 90 minutes, I'm going to plant a seed. And if I pick up my phone during that time, I can do that if it rings or if I get a text message. But if I pick it up and swipe for any other reason, I kill the forest. Right, and that's right now. Luckily, it's virtual. But there's that emotional buy-in. It's such a simple thing, and yet we really feel that. We feel guilt. And the nice side of that is, although we potentially kill a virtual forest, on the plus side in the real world, once you've planted a number of trees, they actually plant real seeds for you. So there's a really lovely positive social aspect from that as well.
Oh, I love that. So Forest is one, and I know I geek out just hearing you talk about some of these apps. Would you mind sharing a few more of the ones that you really like?
Sure. So another favorite is Habit Lab. And the one thing I really love about this is it was developed at Stanford. It was developed across the campus from BJ Fogg's Persuasive Tech Lab. And BJ Fogg is one of the people who would have influenced the likes of the founders of Snapchat and Instagram in relation to creating what was called a frictionless environment. So his whole thing was in relation to how to persuade people to use their apps more. Now, their whole idea was never obviously to have us using them all the time. It was just to have a more engaging app. However, on the other side of the campus, I think it's in the human interface or interaction unit, they developed this app called the Habit Lab, and basically it's a fantastic app that you use on Chrome or it's only on Android. But what it encourages you to do, back to the idea of gamification, is it gives you nudges to either use a app or a website you want to use more, or one you want to use less. So for example, if I find that I'm using Facebook too much and I might get pulled in by the endless news feed or checking comments or looking for the affirmations, what I can do is I can block the newsfeed, or I can cut out things like comments and likes. So I'm just seeing what I go there to see as far as have I got a message, Have I got anything that's specific? And it's coming back, I guess, to that idea of us being in control as opposed to the technology controlling us. Because things like the endless news feed and all these bright lights and notifications, they're triggers. They pull us in. And we struggle a little bit with self-control. So Habit Lab is a really lovely one for helping us with that.
That's awesome. Nina, how about you? Any favorite apps?
My favorite extension is called Inbox When Ready, and it's free, and you can add it to your Gmail. And all it does is it just hides your inbox. And so you have to click show inbox, which is so simple. But when something's in front of us, we tend to engage with it. And so Inbox When Ready really helps me to batch my emails and my communications. And it will also show you the number of times you check your email per day, which is just interesting from a personal reflection standpoint.
I love that. I have anxiety when I open email, not about what's in there, but what's going to come in while I'm trying to solve other things. And I'm always thinking, I'm sure there's several things like that, but I'm super excited to give that a try. So I've already gotten like lists of things that I'm going to follow up on myself and research. And actually, Chris, I think you just gave me the study for my Pepperdine project. I'm looking for a research study that is kind of in the news that people are talking about. So I'm going to look up that iPhone effect study. That sounds really interesting. So before we close, I just want to let people know where they can get more information about both of you. So Nina, I know we've put up some links for Digital Wellness Institute, and I'll share those again in a moment. But also, Chris, I know you do work in addition to teaching at the Institute. So could you share where people can get more information about you?
Sure, yeah. So we run masterclasses on digital wellbeing and digital culture, and you can find out more at unplughq.com.
Great. Unplughq.com. Awesome. Thank you so much. I love geeking out with you, although it still feels a little intimidating. I'm going to take one step at a time and continue to go through the Institute over and over and over again until I get it right. Nina, I know we've got some of your links here as well. You want to talk a little bit more about the day and kind of what's coming next?
Absolutely. So today is Global Digital Wellness Day. In the US, it's also something called Screen Free Week. And so Screen Free Week is put on by the Children's Screen Action Network, which has been around for as long as commercials have been around. And it's really existing to protect children's attention. And so they have adapted a lot of their content for this week, since it's hard for kids to unplug for the whole week, being in school, at home primarily. However, they're holding an incredible event today, and they have great resources on their website. You can go to screenfreeweek.org, I believe. And they're also providing resources on after today. How can you unplug with your family for the weekend, if that's something that you would like to partake in? In terms of professional development, we have two different tracks for you. The first is our course with Athabasca, which is about an hour and a half long, and it's on demand. It's called Optimizing Your Time and Energy, Digital Wellness 101. And there is a 15% off code to that. It is Digital Wellness, all lowercase, that will be active until May 12th. And this is great for people who just want to get their feet wet, HR leaders, team leaders, even people who want to use this information personally. It has a lot of exercises, prompts, a workbook, and so much more. And we made that with Athabasca and Power Ed. And then we have our Digital Wellness Certificate Program, which is kind of the deep dive if you want to integrate curriculum into your organization, your workplace, and you want to become a certified digital wellness educator. And we have a 10% off code for that, also active until May 12th. And that discount code is Dr. Heidi, all caps.
That's me, by the way, in case you're wondering. Yes, I'm so excited to see how that program continues to evolve too, because it's just amazing. And we have such a great team there, and I learned so much. So I'm excited to continue that with you. So the next cohort for that starts May 14th. Is that correct? So like a week.
Exactly 1 week away. We're so excited.
That's awesome. Well, it's been so fun talking with all of you. And I want to thank everyone who has been here, whether it's live or you're watching the recording. I'm going to continue to monitor the chat here offline. So if you have questions or comments for me or Chris or Nina, please go ahead and post those. And we will be sure to give you the best answers that we have. And I will wrap up with a final goodbye from Kevin, who says, thanks, adios, hasta luego. What a great session. And we'll look forward to continuing this conversation another time soon. So happy Global Wellness, Digital Wellness Day to you. Happy sleep time for you, Chris. Thanks for staying up for us. And everyone else, we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.